The air in the Kang family residence smelled of money, not the crisp, papery scent of new bills, but the ancient, layered perfume of wealth so old it had become part of the structure itself. It was in the lemon oil polish on the dark mahogany floors, the faint, almost floral scent of ozone from the humming air purifiers, and the sharp, clean fragrance of imported cypress wood that paneled the grand halls. Beneath it all was the delicate aroma of chrysanthemums and green tea, a constant offering to the home's demanding matriarch. For Amara, it mostly smelled like survival. Her hands, meticulously clean, smoothed the front of her simple gray uniform. The fabric was coarse, a constant reminder of her station. It was a costume, a role she played from 6 in the morning until her bones ached late at night. She stood perfectly still beside a towering porcelain vase, her posture a study in self-effacement. Her dark skin, the color of rich coffee, seemed to absorb the opulent light of the chandeliers, making her a shadow in a house of blinding surfaces. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, tight bun, not a single strand daring to escape. Only her eyes, deep and watchful, held a life separate from her rigid form. They moved constantly, cataloging, assessing, missing nothing. This servitude was a strategic retreat, a necessary humiliation. Every deferential nod, every silent acceptance of a casual insult bought another day of treatment. Specifically, it bought another infusion of pembrolizumab for the woman who was her entire world. Her grandmother, Nana Rose, was fighting stage 4 lung cancer back in a sterile room in Atlanta, and the experimental trial cost $12,000 a month. Amara had the number seared into her mind, a running total of her own subjugation, $72,000 for the first 6 months, a figure that felt like a mountain made of glass. This job, with its under-the-table salary and the quiet bonus the family's son provided for discretion, was the only way to climb it. So she endured. The girl, you. Bring more tea. The voice belonged to Madame Kang, wife of the late Chairman Kang and mother of the current one. It cut through the delicate murmur of conversation in the receiving room, sharp and imperious. Amara didn't look up immediately. She executed a flawless 90-degree turn, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. She moved towards the kitchen, her mind a fortress. Inside its walls, she was not Amara, the help. She was Amara, the analyst, the strategist, the woman who had once briefed generals and untangled financial networks for a man who commanded a different kind of army. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Choi, intercepted her by the kitchen door, her face a mask of pinched anxiety. Perspiration beaded on her upper lip. "The young master is on his way," she whispered, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Madame is on edge. Be careful. Be invisible." Amara inclined her head. "Yes, Mrs. Choi." The words were deferential, the tone placid. Inside, she braced herself. The arrival of Kang Dae-hyun, the Cheongryong Syndicate's silent, lethal leader, changed the atmospheric pressure of the house. Fear, usually a low hum, sharpened to a piercing shriek. Staff moved faster, spoke less, and avoided eye contact at all costs. For Amara, his presence was a complication. He was the source of the discretion bonus, but he was also a variable she couldn't fully control, a predator in his own home. As she prepared the new pot of sejak tea, her hands moved with an economy and grace that was at odds with her station. She measured the leaves, monitored the water temperature, and warmed the porcelain pot with the practiced ease of a connoisseur. Chairman Kwan, her foster father, had taught her. He'd insisted that understanding the ritual of tea was understanding the subtleties of power. Patience, precision, and respect for the vessel, he used to say, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. Whether it is a teacup or an organization, she carried the heavy silver tray back into the receiving room. Madame Kang was holding court with 3 other women, their wives of equal rank in Seoul's gilded cage. Their laughter was high and brittle, like ice cracking. "It's simply impossible to find good help anymore," one of the women, Mrs. Park, was saying, waving a hand glittering with diamonds. "They're either lazy or they steal." Madame Kang made a small, dismissive sound. "This one is quiet, at least, and the contrast is so decorative." She gestured vaguely in Amara's direction, her eyes sweeping over her as if she were a piece of furniture. The racist Barb, cloaked in aesthetic appreciation, was typical. Amara felt the familiar tightening in her chest, a cold knot of fury she immediately suppressed. She focused on Nana Rose's face, her warm smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. $72,000. She began to pour the tea, her movements fluid and silent. As she leaned forward to fill Madame Kang's cup, she noticed a slight misalignment in the priceless Goryeo Celadon vase on the table behind her. It was infinitesimally off-center, a detail no one else would ever see. A flicker of an old instinct, the analyst's eye for things out of place, sparked in her mind. She resisted the urge to correct it. Her job was to be invisible, not to notice. The heavy front doors of the residence opened and closed with a soundless, hydraulic hiss. A sudden, profound silence fell over the house. The servants froze. Even the chattering wives in the receiving room paused, their smiles tightening. He was here. Kang Dae-hyun entered the room not like a man entering his home, but like a general inspecting a captured city. He was flanked by two men in impeccable dark suits, their faces blank, their presence doubling the density of the air. Dae-hyun moved with a controlled, predatory grace that seemed to consume the space around him. His suit was a charcoal gray so dark it was almost black, tailored with a precision that spoke of astronomical expense. On his wrist, he wore a Patek Philippe watch, a simple, elegant piece whose value could have paid for Nana Rose's treatment for 3 years. His black hair was cut short, severe, but it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were cold, dark, and utterly still. They were the eyes of a man who calculated consequences in terms of lives, not dollars. He ignored his mother and her guests, his gaze sweeping the room in a quick, dismissive assessment. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met Amara's. There was no recognition, no acknowledgement. It was like being scanned by a machine. Then he looked away, turning his attention to his mother as if just now noticing her. "Mother." His voice was a low baritone, devoid of warmth. Declarative. Madame Kang's brittle facade softened into a performance of maternal affection. "Dae-hyun, my son, you're just in time. We were just discussing Mrs. Park's charity gala." The atmosphere in the room was thick with unspoken things. Amara finished pouring the tea and began to retreat, her movements slow and deliberate, designed to draw no attention. She wanted to be gone before the storm, whatever it was, broke. But Madame Kang was not finished with her performance. The presence of her powerful son seemed to have ignited a need to demonstrate her own authority, to exercise her power on the only person in the room she could. "Wait!" she commanded, her voice sharp again. Amara froze, her back to the room. "I want to show the ladies the new acquisition, the Song Dynasty vase my late husband purchased at auction. Bring it here." Mrs. Choi, hovering in the doorway, made a tiny, panicked gesture. The vase was notoriously unstable, a museum piece worth millions. Handling it was forbidden for anyone but the curator who came once a month. Amara turned slowly. "Madame, Mrs. Choi has instructed that the curator—" "Are you questioning me?" The question was soft but laced with venom. "Are you telling me what I can and cannot do in my own home?" The other women watched, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of a blood sport. Dae-hyun stood by the window, his back partially to them, seemingly indifferent. But Amara could see the rigid line of his shoulders in the reflection on the glass. He was listening. "No, madame." Amara's voice was a low murmur. "Of course not." "Then bring it to me." Survival. It was a simple, brutal calculation, the job versus the vase. She walked to the pedestal where the Celadon masterpiece sat. It was a thing of sublime beauty, its pale green glaze shimmering under the light. Her hands, steady as a surgeon's, lifted it. It was lighter than she expected, and the balance was wrong. Another flicker of the analyst's warning. Something was not right. She carried it towards the low table where the women sat, her steps measured, her breath held tight in her chest. Madame Kang was smiling, a thin, cruel curve of her lips. She gestured to the center of the table. "Place it here, so everyone can appreciate its beauty." As Amara leaned forward, her arms extended, Madame Kang shifted in her seat. Her silk-clad knee bumped the leg of the table. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. The table jolted. The world slowed down. Amara saw the vase tilt. She saw the priceless curve of its neck begin its arc towards the floor. She saw the horrified gasps forming on the faces of the other women, and she saw the look of triumphant malice in Madame Kang's eyes. This was the trap. If the vase broke, it was her fault. Her wages would be garnished for a lifetime. She would be fired, blacklisted. The payments for Nana Rose would stop. She had one choice. She released her grip on the vase with one hand, twisting her body to cushion its fall against her own torso. So while her other hand, the one holding the scalding hot silver teapot, shot out to brace herself against the table, the vase was saved. It settled against her hip, hard and safe. But the teapot, upended by the motion, emptied its contents. Boiling water cascaded over her forearm and hand. The pain was a white-hot scream. It was blinding. Absolute. It stole the air from her lungs. For a searing, eternal second, the only thing that existed in the universe was the fire consuming her skin. She didn't make a sound. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a cry. She carefully placed the vase on the table, her movements jerky with shock, and then straightened up, cradling her burned arm. The skin was already blistering, an angry, weeping red. The room was utterly silent. "Clumsy girl." Madame Kang's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Look what you've done. You've spilled tea everywhere, and on yourself. Such a mess." She clicked her tongue. "You see, ladies, utterly useless." Amara stood there, her body trembling from the shock of the burn, her mind a maelstrom of white-hot rage and cold, hard calculation. She met Madame Kang's gaze. The older woman's eyes were alight with victory. Dae-hyun had not moved. He stood by the window, a statue carved from granite. He watched the scene unfold, his face an unreadable mask. His stillness was more terrifying than any outburst. Madame Kang, emboldened by his silence, decided to press her advantage. She wanted to utterly break the girl in front of her guests. She picked up her own teacup, which was still full. "You must learn to be more careful," she said, her voice turning syrupy sweet. She stood up and walked towards Amara. "When something is hot, you must pay attention. Let this be a lesson." And with a small, deliberate movement, she poured the contents of the teacup directly onto Amara's burned hand. A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer casual cruelty. This was torture. This was a spectacle. The second wave of heat was an agony beyond description. This time, a sound did escape Amara's lips, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and immediate. But it wasn't just pain that filled her. It was something else, a decision. 3 seconds to stay silent, to endure, to keep this job for Nana Rose. The face of her grandmother floated in her mind, frail and hopeful. 2 seconds to feel the fire on her skin, to feel the utter contempt of the woman in front of her, the woman who saw her as less than human. 1 second to decide what dignity costs and what it was worth. The cost was everything. It was worth more. The trembling in her body stopped. The mask of deference on her face dissolved, replaced by a profound, chilling calm. The pain was still there, a roaring bonfire in her arm, but she walled it off, locked it away in a distant corner of her mind. She straightened her spine, not just to its full height, but beyond it, as if drawing power from the very air. Her shoulders, usually rounded in submission, squared. She lifted her head, and her eyes, no longer downcast, met Madame Kang's. They were not the eyes of a servant. They were the eyes of a predator that had just been prodded awake. Silence. It was a physical weight in the room, pressing down, suffocating. The air was thick with it. So it was the silence of a chessboard after a devastating, unexpected move. Amara looked from Madame Kang's shocked face to the vase on the table. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud. It was quiet, clear, and carried the cold weight of absolute authority. And it was in Korean, flawless, formal, Seoul Korean without a trace of an accent. Aomioni, she began, the use of the formal familial term for mother, a calculated shock that made Madame Kang flinch as if struck. That vase is a forgery. The collective intake of breath in the room was sharp. The other women stared, their mouths agape. Mrs. Choi in the doorway looked as though she might faint. Amara continued, her voice level, her gaze unwavering. She gestured with her unburned hand toward the vase. The Goryeo celadon of that period had a distinctive, fine crazed glaze, a result of the precise cooling process. This glaze is too uniform. The foot rim has been artificially aged with acid. It's a very good reproduction from the late 1980s, probably from a workshop in Incheon, but it is worthless. Madame Kang's face, a carefully constructed mask of aristocratic poise, shattered. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, mottled gray. What? What are you saying? Who do you think you are? She stammered, the Korean words stumbling from her lips. Amara's expression didn't change. A small, cold smile touched her lips, a terrifying sight. She switched her Korean, the dialect shifting subtly, the edges becoming harder, the cadence changing. It was the rough, working-class dialect of Busan, the language of the docks, of the back alleys, of the criminal underworld. The language of Chairman Kang's generation. 진저는 권 회장님 서재에 있었습니다, she said, her voice dropping into a lower register. The real one was in Chairman Kwan's study. The name landed in the center of the room like a grenade. Chairman Kwan, the legendary deceased head of the Golden Phoenix Syndicate, her late husband's most hated and feared rival. For this foreign servant, to not only know his name but to speak of his private study was impossible. It was unthinkable. Madame Kang stared at her, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Who are you? Before Amara could answer, there was movement. Slow, deliberate. Kang Dae-hyun pushed himself away from the window. Every eye in the room swiveled to him. He walked towards the table, his footsteps the only sound in the tomb-like silence. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at her horrified guests. He looked only at Amara. He stopped in front of her. His cold eyes raked over her, taking in the straight spine, the defiant chin, the devastating burn on her arm. He saw the woman who had been invisible just minutes before, now commanding the absolute attention of the entire room. He saw the fire in her eyes, a fire that had nothing to do with the pain on her skin. He reached out, not to her, but to the table. He picked up the priceless, or worthless, vase. He examined it for a long moment, turning it over in his hands. Then, without a word, he let it drop. It shattered on the mahogany floor, the sound like a gunshot. The women screamed. Madame Kang cried out, a strangled, horrified sound. Dae-hyun's eyes never left Amara's. He spoke, his voice dangerously quiet, Isser in the same Busan dialect she had used. It was a language he rarely used, the language of his father. My office, now. It was not a request. It was a summons. He turned and walked out of the room, his two guards falling into step behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had just redrawn the lines of power in his own house with a single shattering act. Amara stood for a moment longer amidst the wreckage and the stunned silence. She gave Madame Kang one last, long look, a look that promised consequences. Then she turned and followed him, leaving a trail of silent, gaping terror in her wake. The infirmary in the west wing of the estate was a sterile, white room that smelled of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. It was better equipped than many small-town clinics. The family doctor, a pale, nervous man named Dr. Lee, worked on her arm in silence. He cleaned the second-degree burns, applied a thick layer of silver sulfadiazine cream, and wrapped her forearm and hand in sterile white gauze. The pain had subsided into a deep, throbbing ache. Amara sat on the examination table, watching him work, her mind a cold, clear machine. The gamble had been taken. The mask was off. Now came the negotiation. When Dr. Lee finished, he bowed nervously and scurried out of the room. A moment later, one of Dae-hyun's guards entered. He was holding a black silk blouse and a pair of tailored gray trousers. He laid them on a chair without a word and then took up a position by the door. The message was clear. Her servant's uniform was no longer appropriate. She changed, the soft silk a balm against her uninjured skin. The clothes fit perfectly. They had been prepared. He had anticipated this, or something like it. The thought sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool air of the room. The guard led her through silent, cypress-paneled hallways to Kang Dae-hyun's office. It was less an office and more a command center. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a meticulously raked Zen garden. The other walls were lined with bookshelves filled not with novels, but with volumes on finance, logistics, history, and military strategy. The desk was a single, massive slab of black marble, completely clear except for a laptop and a single steaming cup of tea. Dae-hyun stood by the window, looking out at the garden. He didn't turn when she entered. "The tea is for you," he said, his voice calm. "It's a Yunnan blend. It helps with the pain." She walked to the desk but did not sit. She looked at the cup. Chairman Kwan had favored Yunnan tea. Every detail was a test, a signal. "Thank you," she said in English, her voice neutral. He turned from the window. His eyes were intense, analytical. "Kwan Min-ji, that was the name on your file. The file that said you were an orphan from a church in Los Angeles, proficient in domestic service." "The file was a fiction," she stated simply. Chairman Kwan was not known for his sentimentality. He did not adopt strays. "Who are you to him?" he asked, switching to Korean. She met his gaze, replying in the same language. "My parents were diplomats. They served as a back channel for him in Washington. When they were killed in a car bombing meant for him, he took me in. He felt he owed them a debt of honor. He raised me. He trained me." Dae-hyun absorbed this, his expression unchanging. "He trained you to be a housekeeper?" "He trained me to see, to listen, to analyze. He trained me in finance, in strategy, in 4 languages. He trained me to understand the architecture of power, from a boardroom to a back alley, and he trained me to defend myself. He believed his daughter should be able to kill a man with her bare hands if necessary." A flicker of something, not surprise but confirmation, passed through his eyes. "You called my mother Iomioni, a deliberate insult." "It was a reminder," Amara corrected him, "a reminder of the respect a son owes his father. Respect she clearly does not have for her late husband. Selling off his collection piece by piece and replacing it with fakes to fund her projects. You knew the vase was a forgery before she dropped it." "It was a statement, not a question. I suspected. The weight was wrong. And the placement was an invitation for an accident. It was a test. She wanted a reason to dismiss me. Why? I don't know. Perhaps I saw something I wasn't meant to. Perhaps she simply grew tired of me. Her cruelty requires novelty." Dae-hyun was silent for a long moment, studying her. He was piecing together a puzzle, and she was the missing piece he hadn't known existed. "The payments. To the oncology clinic in Atlanta. The file said they were for a cousin." "My grandmother," Amara said, her voice softening for the first time. "She raised me before my parents, before they left." She is all I have. The cost is significant. Chairman Kwan's assets were frozen or seized by his rivals after his death. You were left with nothing. Honor is not a currency that spends easily, she said, echoing one of Kwan's favorite phrases. But it buys loyalty. Not enough to rebuild an empire, but enough for a new identity, a file that gets me into this house. You came here deliberately, he concluded. Why my house? It was the safest place to hide. No one from my father's world would ever look for me here, serving his rival's family. And the pay was sufficient for my needs. Her eyes narrowed slightly. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. Dae-hyun walked around the desk and stood before her. The proximity was electric. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence immense. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne, clean linen, and something colder, like winter steel. My mother and her circle of friends have become a liability, he stated, his voice a low murmur. They are careless. Their greed has made them sloppy. They run side businesses, sell access, trade information. They believe they are untouchable. They are a cancer in my organization. He paused, his eyes dropping to her bandaged arm. And their cruelty is a strategic weakness. It creates enemies where there should be none. He looked back up, his gaze locking with hers. You have a unique perspective. You have been invisible in their world. You know their habits, their conversations. You understand my world, the codes and the language, and you have a motive. This was it, the offer, the trade. I am prepared to take over your grandmother's medical expenses, he said. All of them, for as long as she needs. I will move her to the best private facility in Switzerland. She will have round-the-clock care. She will be protected. The breath caught in Amara's throat. Switzerland. Protection. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. It was safety. It was a cure. In return, he continued, you will work for me. You will no longer be a servant in this house. You will be my agent within it, my eyes and ears. You will uncover the full extent of my mother's network. You will identify every leak, every betrayal, and you will help me cut it out. All of it. It was not a gift. It was a contract, her expertise for her grandmother's life. She thought for a moment, the analyst in her weighing the variables, the risks, the rewards. He was offering her a weapon and a target. I accept, she said, her voice firm. On one condition. Dae-hyun raised a single eyebrow. When the time comes to dismantle her operation, Amara said, her eyes turning to chips of ice. I am the one who does it. Not your men, not you. I handle your mother, personally. The humiliation she gave me today, I will return to her 1,000-fold, in public, where everyone can see. Dae-hyun studied her face, seeing the cold, unbending resolve there. He saw the daughter of Chairman Kwan. He saw a weapon he could unleash. He gave a single, sharp nod. Agreed. He extended his hand. It was not a gesture of friendship, but of sealing a pact. She took it with her uninjured hand. His grip was firm, his skin cool. In that handshake, an alliance was forged in the fires of humiliation and the cold calculus of revenge. The servant was gone. The operative had been activated. In the weeks that followed, the ecosystem of the Kang estate underwent a seismic shift. Amara was no longer Amara, the help. She was Kwan Min-ji, a personal assistant to Dae-hyun, a title that was both vague and menacingly authoritative. She was given a suite of rooms in the East Wing, a wardrobe of tailored clothes, and a laptop connected to the Cheongryong Syndicate's encrypted servers. The staff, led by a terrified Mrs. Choi, treated her with a mixture of awe and fear. They gave her a wide berth, their bows deeper, their eyes never quite meeting hers. To them, she was a ghost who had suddenly materialized into a position of terrifying power. Her primary target, Madame Kang, reacted with predictable fury and disbelief. She refused to acknowledge Amara's new role, still attempting to give her menial orders, which Amara would meet with a polite, cold smile and a quiet refusal. The first time it happened, in front of two of her friends, the humiliation was so profound that Madame Kang locked herself in her rooms for a full day. But Amara knew that beneath the fury, Madame Kang was afraid. And fear made her dangerous. Amara's days were a whirlwind of focused, silent work. She leveraged the access Dae-hyun provided, cross-referencing guest lists from her mother's luncheons with Cheong-ryong's financial records. She was a ghost in the machine, her old analyst skills honed to a razor's edge. She found discrepancies. Small at first, payments to a catering company that didn't exist, invoices for jewelry that was never delivered. Then larger. A pattern began to emerge. A shadow network operating under the cover of charity galas and society meetings. Dae-hyun provided the resources. She provided the intelligence and the strategy. He would leave a file on her desk containing raw data, shipping manifests, bank transfers, surveillance logs. She would return it the next morning with a concise, brutal analysis, connecting dots he hadn't seen, identifying players his own men had missed. She found that his mother was not just skimming, she was selling information. Specifically, she was leaking the routes and schedules of Cheong-ryong's shipping containers to a rival Yakuza clan, the Inagawa Kai, allowing them to intercept high-value shipments of electronics and counterfeit goods. Her breakthrough came during a solo operation. One of Madame Kang's closest confidants was Mrs. Park, the woman who had complained about finding good help. Amara learned that Mrs. Park's son managed a small independent import-export firm. Using the pretext of arranging a floral delivery for an upcoming event, Amara gained access to the Park residence. While the housekeeper was distracted, Amara slipped into the son's home office. It was a calculated risk, an operation conducted entirely without Dae-hyun's knowledge or his men. She needed to prove to herself as much as to him that her capabilities were her own. The office security was amateurish. A simple keypad lock she bypassed in seconds, using a thermal camera attachment on her phone to read the heat signature of the most recently pressed keys. His laptop was password protected. Chiu, but a well-researched guess, the name of his pet poodle combined with his birthday, gave her access. She wasn't a hacker, but Chairman Kwan had taught her that human weakness was the most reliable exploit. Inside, she found what she was looking for, a hidden ledger. It detailed payments from a shell corporation based in Tokyo, cross-referenced with dates that corresponded exactly with hijacked Cheong-ryong shipments. The link was undeniable. Mrs. Park was the intermediary. Her son's company was the laundry. She downloaded the files onto a thumb drive disguised as a jade pendant and was gone in less than 10 minutes. That night, she presented her findings to Dae-hyun. He sat in his office, reading her report in silence, his face grim. When he finished, he looked at her, his eyes dark with a cold fury. "You went into the Park house alone," he stated. "It was necessary to confirm the link," she replied, her tone unapologetic. "Your men would have been noticed. I was just the assistant confirming a flower order." The risk was unacceptable. "The risk of allowing this betrayal to continue is greater," she countered, her voice firm. For the first time, she was not just his operative. She was his strategic equal. She was challenging him. "Your organization is bleeding millions a month. More than that, the Yakuza are gaining a foothold in your territory. This is not just about money. It's about sovereignty." He stared at her for a long moment, a silent battle of wills passing between them. He was the boss, the absolute authority. But she was right. Her intelligence was better. Her methods were cleaner. He gave a curt nod, fighting a concession that felt like a victory. The war, however, was about to escalate. Madame Kang, feeling her power slip, feeling the invisible net tightening around her, made a desperate, vicious move. She must have hired a private investigator, dug into the fiction of Amara's past, and found the one loose thread. Nana Rose. The call came from a burner phone, from a contact Amara had inherited from Chairman Kwan, an old detective in the Seoul police force who still owed him a life debt. His voice was urgent. "Minji, there's a problem. A narcotics officer, a dirty one named Sergeant Kim, just took a warrant to the Silver Serenity nursing home. He's going to your grandmother's room. The warrant is for possession with intent to distribute." Ice flooded Amara's veins. A plant, a frame-up. They were going to arrest a dying old woman. to strip her of her dignity, and most critically, stop her medical treatments. Her life depended on those treatments. This was not just an attack, it was an execution order. Dae-hyun was across the city in a meeting. His men were with him. She was on her own. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat, but she shoved it down. She was the daughter of Chairman Kwan. She was a strategist. She acted. She called the detective back. "You're near the nursing home, aren't you, Uncle?" she asked, her voice a deadly calm as she used the familiar term of respect. "5 minutes away. What are your orders?" "Sergeant Kim cannot be allowed to enter that room. Intercept him, quietly. Use the old codes. Tell him Chairman Kang's son sends his regards and that his disloyalty has been noted. Remind him what happens to rabid dogs." "Understood." "And, Uncle, find out who gave Kim his orders. I want a name." She hung up and stared at her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was no longer a game of finance and information. It was a war for her grandmother's life. An hour later, Dae-hyun stormed into her suite. His face was a thundercloud. "I just heard what happened. My men were on their way." "It's handled," she said, her voice tight. "You used your own network. You didn't call me." "There wasn't time," she shot back, standing to face him. "Your mother crossed a line. She targeted my family, an innocent old woman. In our world, there is a code. Families are off limits. She has no honor." Her voice trembled with rage. "This ends now." "I'll have her removed tonight," he said, his voice a low growl. "A quiet accident. It will be done." "No." The word was sharp, absolute. He stopped, stunned. No one said no to Kang Dae-hyun. "That's not justice," Amara continued, her eyes blazing. "That's a solution. It's not enough. A quiet death lets her keep her reputation. It makes her a tragic figure. I will not allow that. She will be destroyed in the same way she tried to destroy me, publicly, in front of everyone whose opinion she values. She will lose everything. Her name, her wealth, her freedom, her legacy. I will strip it all away from her myself." She looked at him, her plan already forming in her mind, cold and precise. "Her annual charity gala for the Orphans Foundation is in 2 weeks. It's the pinnacle of her social calendar. The entire elite of Seoul will be there. That's our stage. We will not make her a martyr. We will make her a pariah." He watched her, this woman of iron and fire. He saw not just a brilliant operative, but a queen planning the destruction of a rival. Her strategy was more personal, more devastating, and ultimately more complete than his own. It was not just about eliminating a threat. It was about delivering a specific, righteous form of justice. He had offered her resources to be his weapon, but he was beginning to understand that he had allied himself with a force of nature. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "We will do it your way." The night of the Cheongryong Foundation Charity Gala, the Grand Hyatt Ballroom was a galaxy of glittering diamonds and whispered power. The air hummed with the conversations of Seoul's most influential figures, politicians, chaebol heirs, and the shadowy figures who truly ran the city. At the center of it all was Madame Kang, resplendent in a crimson gown, accepting praise and donations with the grace of a reigning queen. This was her stage, her kingdom. Tonight, she was untouchable. Then the doors to the ballroom opened and a hush fell over the crowd. Kang Dae-hyun entered, a figure of dark, imposing authority. But it was the woman at his side who stole the breath from every lung. She was not walking behind him as an assistant or a mistress would. She walked beside him, a partner. Amara was transformed. She wore a custom-made hanbok, the traditional Korean dress, but rendered in a style that was both classic and modern. The jeoggery, the short upper garment, was of a deep indigo silk so dark it was nearly black, embroidered with a single subtle silver dragon along the sleeve. The chima, the voluminous skirt, was a cascade of midnight blue, flowing around her as she moved. Her hair was styled in an elegant, intricate updo, held in place by a single, sharp jade pin. Her bandaged arm was concealed by the long, flowing sleeve. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of simple pearl earrings. She needed none. Her presence was the jewel. As they walked through the parted sea of guests, Amara's eyes scanned the room. She saw Mrs. Park, who froze mid-sip of her champagne, her face paling. She saw the other women from that fateful luncheon, their eyes wide with shock and confusion, and then she saw Madame Kang on the stage, her smile faltering, her eyes locking onto Amara with dawning, horrified comprehension. The servant girl, the help, standing beside her son, dressed like royalty. It was an impossibility that was happening right before her eyes. So Dae-hyun led her not to a guest table, but to the head table at the front of the room, where he took his seat at the center. He gestured to the chair beside him, the seat of honor. Amara sat, her back straight, her posture regal. The message was unambiguous. This woman was his equal. The gala proceeded, but the energy in the room had changed. It was tense, electric with questions. Finally, it was time for the keynote address from the foundation's chairwoman, Madame Kang. She walked to the podium, her composure regained, but a slight tremor in her hands betrayed her nerves. She began her speech, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. As she was finishing, Dae-hyun leaned toward Amara. "Now," he murmured. Amara stood up and moved towards the stage. Two of Dae-hyun's men moved with her, parting the crowd. She walked up the steps and stood beside the podium, waiting. Madame Kang stopped, mid-sentence, staring at her. "What is the meaning of this?" Madame Kang hissed, her voice low and furious. Amara ignored her. She turned to the audience. Dae-hyun's men had quietly replaced the background slide on the large screen behind the stage. It was now a simple, stark Cheongryong dragon crest. Amara took the microphone from the podium. Her voice, amplified through the ballroom's sound system, was calm, clear, and resonant. "Good evening," she began in flawless, formal Korean. "My name is Kwon Min-ji. For those of you who do not know me, I was the foster daughter of the late Chairman Kwon of the Golden Phoenix Syndicate." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the audience. To invoke that name here, in this place, was a declaration of war. "I have served for the past several months in the Kang household," she continued, her eyes finding Madame Kang's. "It has been educational." She turned her attention back to the crowd. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate charity, to support orphans, a noble cause, a cause that is funded, as it turns out, by betrayal and theft." The murmurs grew louder. "For the past 18 months, Amara's voice hardened, turning from silk to steel. "The chairwoman of this foundation, Madame Kang, has been using her position and her husband's name to systematically defraud the Cheongryong organization. She has done this in partnership with several people in this room." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the front tables. Mrs. Park looked like she was about to be sick. "She has sold shipping schedules, corporate intelligence, and security protocols to our rivals, the Inagawa Kai." At the mention of the Yakuza, a new, more dangerous silence fell. This was no longer just a social scandal. This was a matter of underworld treason. "Stop this," Madame Kang whispered, grabbing for the microphone. "You have no proof." Amara moved the microphone away, her eyes cold. "Proof?" she said, her voice dropping. She switched to the Busan dialect, the rough language of the streets, for all the men in the room to hear. The language of consequences. "The proof is in the 23 hijacked shipments out of Incheon. The proof is in the accounts of the shell company, Sakura Imports, managed by Park Dong-jin." She looked directly at a pale-faced Mrs. Park. "Your son is very careless with his passwords." "Ma'am." She reached into a hidden pocket in her handbook and pulled out a small object. It was an intricately carved jade pendant, the same one she had used to disguise her thumb drive. She held it up for all to see. "But the greatest proof is this," she said, her voice ringing with cold triumph. "This pendant, a gift from Madame Kang to the Inagawa Kai Oyabun, a symbol of their partnership, a token of her betrayal of her own family. She looked at the powerful men in the room, the capos of the Cheongryong syndicate sitting at the front tables. This pendant belonged to my father, Chairman Kwan. He took it from the Oyabun's grandfather in a card game in Macau 30 years ago. It was a trophy, a symbol of his dominance. Your chairwoman, in her ignorance, gave away a piece of history she didn't even understand. She gave our enemy back his pride, paid for with your money and your blood. The impact of this revelation was devastating. It wasn't just about theft. It was about an unforgivable act of disrespect, an insult to the memory of their late chairman and to every man who served him. Madame Kang stared at the pendant, her face a mask of horror. She finally broke. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "She is lying! Dae-hyun, my son, do something! She's just a servant! She's just the help!" All eyes turned to Dae-hyun. He sat at his table, his face impassive. He said nothing. His silence was her condemnation. Amara leaned into the microphone, her voice now a deadly whisper that carried to every corner of the silent room. Not his entire household. It was over. Madame Kang crumpled, not fainting, but collapsing into herself, all a ruin of silk and shattered pride. The other women involved in her scheme were already being quietly, efficiently escorted from the room by Dae-hyun's men. There would be no police, no public trial. Justice in their world was swifter and more absolute. Their assets would be seized, their families exiled. They would be erased. As Dae-hyun's guards moved towards the stage to take his mother, Amara stepped back, her duty done. The fire of her rage had cooled, leaving behind the cold, clean satisfaction of a debt paid in full. Justice delivered with her own hands. 6 months later, the view from Amara's office was of the glittering, sprawling metropolis of Seoul. She was no longer in the Kang estate, but in the penthouse of the Cheongryong Tower, the nerve center of Dae-hyun's empire. She wore a tailored black suit, her hair cut in a sharp, professional bob. The scars on her arm had faded to a pale, silvery network, a permanent reminder of the fire that had forged her new life. She was not an assistant. She was the head of the organization's new internal auditing and intelligence division. Her job was to be the cancer detector, to find the corruption and rot that Dae-hyun, from his position at the top, could not see. She was restructuring their finances, closing loopholes and exposing weaknesses with the same ruthless efficiency she had used to destroy Madame Kang. She was not just valued, she was essential. A video call chimed on her laptop. She smiled as her grandmother's face appeared on the screen. Nana Rose looked vibrant, her cheeks full, her eyes sparkling. She was sitting in a sun-drenched room with a view of the Swiss Alps behind her. The treatments were working. She was in remission. "Look at you, my love," Nana Rose said, her voice warm and strong. "Running the world from your big office." "Just trying to keep up, Nana," Amara laughed. "Are the doctors treating you well?" "They treat me like a queen, baby. A queen." They talked for 20 minutes, the easy, loving conversation that was the anchor of Amara's life. When she hung up, she leaned back in her chair, a sense of profound, quiet gratitude washing over her. She had done it. She had saved her. The door to her office opened and Dae-hyun walked in. He moved with the same predatory grace, but his presence was no longer a threat. It was a familiar gravity. He placed a cup of tea on her desk. It was the Yunnan blend, the one he knew she favored. A small, silent gesture of care. He stood beside her desk, looking out the window at the city lights. They worked in a comfortable silence for several minutes, two predators at rest. "The Inagawa Kai sent a peace overture today," he said finally, not looking at her. "They want a new treaty. They are impressed by our new security measures." He meant they were impressed by her. "A strong fence makes good neighbors," she replied, taking a sip of the tea. He turned his gaze from the window to her. In the soft light of the office, the coldness in his eyes was muted, replaced by something warmer, something that looked almost like admiration. The other capos had started to whisper about it. the rare, almost imperceptible smile that would sometimes appear on the boss's face when he was speaking to Kwan Minji. It was never for them. My father believed honor was a birthright, he said quietly, his voice a low rumble, something to be defended. Amara met his gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. My father taught me that honor is not given, she replied. It is built. She paused, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. Or reclaimed. He held her gaze for a long moment, a universe of unspoken understanding passing between them. It was not romance, not in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, a profound, absolute recognition. He saw all of her, the strategist, the warrior, the survivor, and valued every part. And she saw him, the man behind the mask of the Mafia boss, a man bound by a code she understood better than anyone. It was a partnership forged in violence and sealed in respect. It was a form of belonging she had never known. She was finally home. What would you do for the person you love most?